Across the many vampires of Warhammer Fantasy, some have stories that remain kind of vague, undisclosed basically. And this story in particular is fascinating to me the most. You see, Nourgul is regarded as a legendary vampire of the necrarch bloodline. For those of you who don't know necrarchs, please check out my latest video covering that topic. But Nourgul the Wamphyro is a particularly interesting vampire as he nearly wiped out the collection of city-states in the Border Princes region known as Estalia. For those who do not know, the Border Princes are nations of city-states that have existed for many, many years, with armies that range from super high elite mercenaries to just commoners with a gun. These cities are ancient, and according to some records, these city-states outlast the Empire and Bretonnian cities, claiming that they were the first human cities in the old world to ever exist. The city-state nation of Estalia is where we talk of the story of Nourgul. You see, Nourgul was like any necrarch, magically dangerous, hell-bent on ruling a kingdom of obedient undead. The necrarch bloodline, as I stated in my necrarch video, are arguably the most dangerous vampires to exist, as they do not wish to rule over humanity, but to instead rule over the grave. Nourgul was a shining example of this. He spent centuries hidden from the world studying necromancy after his very own blood father, the very first necrarch, Wamphyro. Having hailed directly from Wamphyro, this led to Nourgul the Wamphyro to be extremely blessed in vampiric lore and power. With such strength, Nourgul decided to obtain the very essence of power his own master had coveted, and that power laid within the Temple of Myrmidia, the ancient book known as the Tome of Wisdom. Now, what lays inside the Tome of Wisdom is a mystery, but that tome is belonging to the goddess of intervention and war. So, whatever uses a dark vampire has, such as Wamphyro or Nourgul, planned on with this book, would not have been good for humanity. If you have the Tome of Wisdom, which contains nothing but knowledge on how to create and how to propagate war, and here's these guys who like to craft flesh, it's just a bad recipe for disaster. You see, 1,000 years or so before this event, Wamphyro himself sieged Estalia, and he himself nearly took the Tome of Wisdom before a vampire of the Blood Knights smote him down. No, the original bloodline smote him down. Having been slain and defeated at the temple, with the tome just within his grasp, Wamphyro fled and somehow survived the encounter despite being impaled by a massive spear by none other than Abarash, the first Blood Knight. So here we are. The descendant of Wamphyro is carrying on the same goal and war. This time, Estalia is woefully unprepared. Nourgul had all the time in the world to assemble his army, and he prepared. Tens of thousands of undead at his call, and hordes of gigantic man-sized bats raining terror from the sky. Nourgul was ready for war. Estalia fared pretty terribly in this fight. The war was dubbed War of Blood from the sheer amount of losses they had taken. Estalia lost city after city, and with each fight lost, the undead numbers increased. Finally, the city of Myrmidia lay within Nourgul's grasp. Here he sieged for days on end. When finally the defender was finally cut down, once the last banner was toppled, a gigantic bat came down from the sky carrying none other than Nourgul, and descended into the Temple of Myrmidia, where the Tome of Wisdom was laid. Now, none really know what happened next, for you see, Nourgul was not found. Only the Tome of Wisdom was still on its pedestal, and a large pile of ashes were in front of it. The undead horde without their master scattered and became an easy, disorganized mass that the Estalian army could easily wipe out. Yet, after this war, the following decades in Estalia's history were filled with recovery attempts. Attempts at finding and killing any vampire in their nation, any undead that still roamed, and any would-be death magic users that decided to seek refuge in their lands. Astalia would not see the glory days again for the next few decades to almost a century. The effects of Nourgul are still fresh in many Astalian eyes, as the event was a mere 300 years ago. And to many who study the vampires of Sylvania, they note how lucky the Empire is that the vampires they face are not of the necrarch bloodline. For the von Karstein bloodline wishes to rule over humanity, and as such would leave people alive. Whereas the terrible powers of a necrarch, they would sap all life from the kingdom, killing and binding everybody into their undead servants. The lost Gloria of Astalia serves as a warning to all that you should never let the necrarch brood in their caves, to always chase after them and purge them so that way they do not gain the time required to grow their armies. Because once their armies are grown, that puts every nation on the brink of disaster and death. I hope you've enjoyed. This has been Freezer 700, signing off.